Hi, I'm Ed Bacon, the rector of All Saints Church, Pasadena. Whoever you are and wherever you find yourself on the journey of faith, I hope that you'll find something here that speaks to you. Welcome.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. I was hoping that we'd have this kind of turnout because I'm very eager to hear what your responses to the inauguration were. And what's driving this for me is that I think that Monday, this past Monday, helped us understand where President Obama's coming from in terms of his, what I call, peace and justice agenda. And I want us to kind of be clear about that. I want to kind of emphasize that. But I must say that in reading the responses to his inaugural speech this week, I needed to, I got shifted a little bit in what I wanted to say. I want to talk first a little bit about the spirituality, the theology of the speech. Now, this is due to a fantastic article, to my way of thinking, written by Diana Butler Bass, who's a friend of ours. She is the best-selling author of Christianity After Religion, The End of Church, and The Birth of a New Spiritual Awakening, about which she came here and spoke. If you want to see what she had to say, just go to our archives and download that. But in the Washington Post this week, on I think it was Friday, and Dinah, if you're watching from Washington, D.C., welcome. Dinah knows that we're going to be talking about this a little bit right here at the beginning. And welcome to everybody else who's streaming. Diana takes note of the fact that we are in now, in the 21st century, a situation where Christianity is no longer the majority religion. And with the increase, you all have been seeing the polls. If I can find it, there's a poll that's come out by the Pew people, Pew Research folks, that showed that since the beginning of this century, there has been a precipitous decline in the number of people who are identifying themselves as religious. More and more people are identifying themselves as none, N-O-N-E, or atheist or agnostic. And because of the theological, religious, and spiritual pluralism of America, for anybody who was going to make an inaugural speech who was awake, like we expect President Obama to be, he couldn't rely on the old tried and true theological memes that have been used by an inauguration, and he had to reach for something else. And she said that she thought he did a marvelous job, and I think he did a masterful job as well. In fact, she calls this the first spiritual but not religious inaugural sermon. A 21st century expression of American civil spirituality. Now, during the Nixon years and after, we on the left really were critical of American civil religion, and rightly so. And what she's saying is that civil religion now really has imploded on itself, and now was a first attempt on the part of a president to establish a spiritual but not religious theology. Now, the way he does that, according to Diana, is to emphasize the theme journey, which is a theme that we have around here all the time. You know, George Regas in his rectorate gave us this thing about whoever you are on the journey of faith. Journey is huge to us. We are not an arrival people in our mentality here at All Saints Church. We have a journey theology. And here Diana is saying that with Obama's use of the journey theme, that he appealed not only to something from his African-American Protestantism and liberal Christianity, but also something that is, of course, in Judeo-Christian tradition, but also something that's in Buddhism and in all of the other world religions, and that spiritual but not religious people can relate to, is this business of journey. Now, I'll unpack that a little bit more in just a second when we talk about what the actual agenda items were from President Obama. But before I go there, I want to emphasize one other theme that I think was a religious theme, a spiritual theme, that President Obama held up. Not only did he hold up the theme of journey, but he held up the theme of oneness, togetherness, community, we the citizens, and the whole Kingian notion of interdependence and interconnectedness. Now, he did a wonderful rhetorical job of contrasting that with, in the presence of his detractors sitting there on the stage with him, distinguishing the interconnectivity of Dr. King with the separate self notion of Ayn Rand. And I thought it was a masterful, muscular, passionate statement. And there is that famous statement that I'll quote later on about making sure that we have the safety net, the social safety net, is not about creating a nation of takers, but taking what we need so that we can be risk takers. It's a wonderful play on words. But just to emphasize this notion of oneness, togetherness, and interconnectedness, I wanted to just draw attention to one other element of the morning. Now, as somebody who's a liturgist, I looked at the liturgical dimensions of the entire event. And if we had all of the hymns sung by Beyonce and the others, James Taylor and the other sister, Kelly Clarkson, and we had a sermon in the inauguration speech, what was the scripture? Well, clearly it was Richard Blanco's poem. And I went back in and studied that puppy. And you know, it was called One Today. And there were 7 uses of the word one. One sun, one light, one ground, one wind, one sky, one moon, one country. 7, a very biblical, numerologically significant number. This is not the entire poem, but I think the really important lines. One sun rose on us today. One light, waking up rooftops, under each one a story. All of us as vital as the one light we move through. Many prayers, but one light. 3. One ground, our ground, rooting us. 4. The dust of farms and deserts, cities and plains, mingled by one wind. One breath, breathe. Here, H-E-A-R. The doors we open for each other all day, saying hello, shalom, buongiorno, howdy, namaste, or buenos dias, in the language my mother taught me, in every language spoken into one wind, carrying our lives without prejudice as these words break from my lips. Then 5, one sky toward which we sometimes lift our eyes. We head home through the gloss of rain or weight of snow or the plum blush of dusk, but always home, always under one sky, our sky. And 6, and always one moon, like a silent drum tapping on every rooftop and every window. And 7, of one country, all of us facing the stars. And then his conclusion, hope, a new constellation waiting for us to map it, waiting for us to name it together. Now, that evokes from us, right, e pluribus unum, which is one of President Obama's favorite phrases, from many one. Now, so as we think about the theology of undergirding this, which is a kind of a spiritual but not religious theology, think about journey and think about interconnectedness or oneness. Then, clearly the creed of the service was, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all persons are created equal. And he came back to that creed over and over again and said through that creed, 6 things happened in our history. We ended slavery and moved forward together, making ourselves anew. 2, we developed railroads and highways to speed travel and commerce. 3, we developed schools and colleges to train our workers. 4, we established certain rules to ensure competition and fair play in a free market, a regulated capitalism. 5, we resolved to care for the vulnerable and protect from life's worst hazards and misfortunes. And 6, both the above and remained skeptical of central authority insisting on hard work and personal responsibility. So now we get to the agenda. One of my favorite poems, hymns, is James Russell Lowell's Once to Every Man a Nation. Now, not all of the theology of that hymn is good. Consequently, it's not in the 1982 hymnal. It got booted out. But because it's not just once to every man a nation, we have grace gives us opportunities every day to choose. But one of my favorite couplets in that poem, which interestingly enough, we are sending to all of our applicants to the jobs that we have opened to ask them to comment on this, is time makes ancient good uncouth. And that is so important. And Barack Obama was talking about that. He said, the things that worked in the past, which we considered good, aren't good and aren't working anymore. So let's talk about what has to change, holding the journey and the oneness and the creed. And now let's talk about what has to change for new times. Education reform there are 13 of them. Education reform in our schools, continuing to improve the infrastructure, create jobs, empower our citizens with the skills they need to work harder, learn more, and reach higher, end perpetual war, maintain both engagement and both diplomatic and military, but end this crazy notion of perpetual war. Continue to recover the economy, grow the middle class, providing healthy wages for honest labor. 7, remake our government. 8, revamp our tax code. 9, reduce the cost of health care. 10, reduce the size of our deficit. 11, both provide for the aging and invest in the young. Both and. Provide for the aged and invest for the young. And here was his notion of preserving Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. And here was my favorite set of lines. These things do not sap our initiative, they strengthen us. They do not make us a nation of takers, they free us to take the risks that make this country great. 12, respond to climate change. 13, sustainable energy resources and care for our planet. And then there are just a few more agenda items, which he filed under back to this notion of journey. He said, for our journey is not complete until our wives, mothers, and daughters can earn a living equal to their efforts. 2, our gay brothers and sisters are treated like anyone else under the law, for if we are truly created equal, then surely the love we commit to one another must be equal as well. 4, no citizen is forced to wait for hours to exercise the right to vote. 4, we find a better way to welcome the striving, hopeful immigrants, immigration reform. And 5, gun control. All our children from the streets of Detroit to the hills of Appalachia to the quiet lanes of Newtown know that they're cared for and cherished and always safe from their labors. So that's really kind of an 18-point agenda. Let me stop there. We've got 30 minutes. For some reason, it's hot in here to me. I'm taking off my jacket. Maybe it's because I'm working. And let's talk now about what you heard and didn't hear and critique and want to file with me. We did this exercise with the vestry the other night. It was very enlightening. Vestry is about to go on its vestry staff conference. I want to take whatever we hear from you there. So we have a microphone that's going to pick it up for the streaming people, and also we have mics, portable mics, coming to each of you. The reason we ask you to wait and get the mic in front of your mouth is so that the people who are streaming can hear your comments. So please raise your hand, and here come the mics, and let's hear what you liked, what thrilled you, what turned you off, what you are skeptical about, whatever. Mark?
Enjoy it when you need to take off your coat. It's a good sign. More than a comment about that, I wanted to talk about the Pasadena One City School Initiative.
Good.
And this idea that we can turn our schools into resources for, the people who are there and the people who are around there. And I think it's so interesting that in all of these policy arenas, we have a hard time discussing the profound spiritual benefits of being part of a transformative journey. That we benefit so profoundly from helping our brothers and sisters move forward. And I think that, it's an amazing document they're creating around opportunities for nonprofits and businesses and schools to contribute. And we need to help bring the discussion to the spiritual necessity of this work and the benefits that are there for everybody. And I think that's all spun through this wonderful inaugurational speech. And yet it's always difficult for policymakers to go there.
Thank you very, very much. Other comments, questions? George?
I appreciate your response and your reflection. And I love the inauguration. I was thrilled by it. But the one thing that is absent from the one is that we are one world. We are one people. And that those children being killed through our drones way off from America are also part of the one people. He did not deal with that. And I think that is a huge impoverishment in the vision that this nation needs. I mean, we really need to know that we've got to stop destroying other people who are not Americans and sharing our political economic agenda. That was missing, and we need to raise that up. And I'll guarantee you, I'll bet my last nickel that next week, when you have that speaker here, he will tear you apart on that issue.
Absolutely.
And so, not to put that out from All Saints, that the oneness means we must stop destroying people over there.
That's right. Amen. I want to underscore that, and George is referring to Cornel West, who's going to be here next week, and he is such a blatant critic and a thrilling critic and a right-on target critic of the president about that and lots of other things. Okay, here's a hand I see right behind you. Yeah.
Yes, one of the other things that we'll hear about next week from him is that they didn't really mention specifically poverty and all extreme changes we have from one extreme to the other. The middle's not really there so much anymore. We either have people suffering on a reservation or, being well off someplace else.
Thank you. He just touched on the gap, but not really getting down into it. Okay, other comments? This is helpful. Here's one right here from Mike, and then right there. Marty, go ahead first. Marty?
Thank you, Ed, and thank you, George, for this. These comments are thrilling. I was very moved by Obama's constant reference to the Constitution, speaking not just for himself of what he promises to do, but we the people. Speaking as though he were also a citizen, most definitely. And that I felt that call, I guess it's because I'm an All Saints kid, that it's a call for action, and for us as citizens to take responsibility. He cannot do this without us really speaking to him. And we have to get better at what we do. We have a long history of being activists, passionate activists, but we have to become more competent. You remember Dean Brackley, Ed,
Yep.
our mutual mentor, who said, we need to become competent agents of change. And I think that's what he's asking us to do.
Thank you. Let me pause there a minute and say something. Dinah Butler Bass's article, in something she said, made me think about Obama's background as a community organizer in Chicago. It's a place in his speech where he talks about things needing to change, things as they are versus as the way they ought to be. Now, that's directly out of Saul Alinsky and the Industrial Areas Foundation training, which I am assuming in those days in Chicago when Barack Obama was a community organizer, that he was marinated in that notion, that we always have to look at, be aware of things as they are and contrast that with the things that as they should be, and to understand that we the people, when organized, are stronger than organized money. The IF, in their 10-day training, I went through it my first year I was here at All Saints, says that there are two kinds of power: organized people and organized money. And that if people are properly, competently, which the point you're making, competently organized, that they can be a voice against the organized money. I think that's really true. Now, I was checking that out just so that I had the language right. And I got a little bothered because also as a part of the training is what the IF calls the iron rule, and that is never do for the people what they can do for themselves or should do for themselves. And I hope that Brother Barack is not taking the role of the community organizer and backing down from what he needs to do as a leader. I think he learned that in the first term. But the whole notion of our being together, and he's a citizen too, and that he and we must do for ourselves, and that he can't afford to be in that distancing posture of saying, the people have to make me do it. You know, that old FDR quote that we often use. I hear that, and I want him to use that bully pulpit, and I want us to keep really pressing him on that. Thanks very much for that comment. There was somebody else who, yes. Please, Mike.
A couple of things. One, Richard Blanca, the poet,
Yes.
was really one of the highlights for me of the program, especially since I'd heard him interviewed on the NewsHour. He was asked to submit 3 poems to the White House, and he did not know when he was on the program which one they were going to pick. So White House picked a brilliant poem, and I think the president really meshed that with his speech so beautifully. Secondly, it's discouraging to hear from my friends on the other side of the aisle. Their reaction to the speech was totally different to mine. So I'm just wondering, we have to realize that people listen to things they want to hear and just disregard things they don't agree with.
Stay with that, Mike. Talk a little bit more about what the content is of your friends across the aisle and how you respond to that as a progressive?
Well, since most of these comments have come by email,
Okay.
back and forth, it's a little hard to be too specific,
Got
but I frankly was not surprised that, and mainly these were, it happened to coincide with a kind of reunion of a fraternity group, so these were people all my age that had my similar background from UCLA and business and what have you.
Got it.
And you just sort of been tracking them all along.
Mm-hmm.
But and thinking of the Republican legislatures, I wasn't impressed with their remarks.
Yeah.
And but it was just a wonderful day, and how some people didn't look at it that way. I guess that's something we have to live with.
Yeah. Thank you. Please.
In response to what my fellow All Saintsians said here, I think, and this is what has been troubling me, as a progressive Christian, being raised farther right than right. My father was in the military. I grew up all over the world. I think the best way for us to respond is to vehemently and with everything we have instill in our young people what those of us in this room already have. To hear people say right after the inauguration, when they would go to someone on the right and ask for a response, and to have that response be, well, he didn't say anything about the fact that if we, don't cut the deficit, we're not going to be here, what have you, and to study the definition of the word conservative, etc. So I think that's, I can't say enough about how important I think that is. And you can see it in our young people as they come up. But to really ground them in the opportunity to understand, to your point, what you said about how much we get back from giving to our brother. And George, to your point, to help our young people understand that that child on the other side of the globe is our child here. I think if we can get that, the more we can get that to sift down, the stronger we become.
Thank you. Next. Please.
First, I just wanted to say how wonderful it is to have a president who can put two sentences together.
True.
Well, it's just a joy to hear him talk. I don't always agree with him, but it's a joy to hear him talk.
No, I hear you. Before you, I was helped so much by Connie Rice the Sunday before, because she came out with that really very appropriate and harsh criticism of President Obama in some some actions he had taken in terms of immigration. And then she talked about, I just love him I just love him. I can't help the fact that I love him. And when he smiles and when he speaks and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's really a truth about a lot of us.
Yeah, he's,
Yeah.
It's wonderful to have him as president. In my
And
opinion.
keep going. Excuse me for interrupting.
As a gay person, I was shocked. It was wonderful because it was Martin Luther King Day and I had the day off. So I was a couch potato all day and all night. I watched the whole thing from beginning to end, to actually be mentioned in the inaugural speech, I was just flabbergasted, overjoyed, of course, but for him to be just so positive. Another thing to consider, though, is the State of the Union, which is coming up. So I think this is more of a two-parter here. This is the preamble, I think, to some more specifics that will be coming down the road. I really hope that he'll do some executive work and in the federal government, at least, and get rid of some of the red tape that is preventing gay and lesbian people from actually participating without being punished, either financially or spouse-wise or whatever it is. But he can turn some keys himself without Congress. Another thing is I think something that George kind of raised is the specter of war continuing in the Middle East. It's as the nuclear program in Iran continues to go forward, and Israel on the brink of perhaps a preemptive strike, which could drag us in. We've been at war for so long; it's pitiful. I was in the military for 8 years, so I understand that. But I also understand that we can't back away from that either. We can't just pull back from let the rest of the world go itself. We're in it. We have to stay in it. And people do die, unfortunately. I hate that, as we all do. But that's what militaries do. The 30 guys that got killed in that, was it last week or so, when they were rounded up and taken hostage and murdered. So that can't go on. I mean, it just cannot go on. And somebody has to do something.
Yes.
So
it's
unfortunate.
We have to do something, and then as we stop the wars, we have to take that money and deal with infrastructure issues, and particularly with education with the kids. Thank you. Please, here's a hand here. Okay. Okay, go ahead, please. And then Clark after him. Go ahead.
Ed, so I sat a few weeks ago in your presentation about the movie Lincoln.
Yes.
And you made a recommendation. I just began to read Edwin Friedman's Generation to Generation. Thank you.
Thrill.
Differentiated leadership.
Yes.
I would love to hear your thoughts about kind of this triangulation of Lincoln, where Obama is, and where we are as a nation of dysfunction, because that's really, I think, what I'm getting from Friedman. He's talking about this family dynamic, and not just the country, but certainly Congress, and the things that he's dealing with to try to get to action.
Yeah.
Beyond, the things he said on Monday.
Thank you very much. I think that the key to where we are now from Friedman's thinking is how important it is for a differentiated thinker to continue to define himself or herself, even apart from Congress. And Friedman gave an awful lot of thought to the relationship between the presidency and the Congress. He could rattle off the names of every president in order, and how many wives they had, and whether they were married or not, and how many children they had, and he had a unified theory about how all of that played into the person's own anxiety level. And the higher the person's anxiety level, the lower their ability to lead and be defined. So the way I think that he would critique Obama is that he needs to do more of that definition, even apart from Congress. And his passionate thesis was you can be defined more as long as you're staying connected. And to the degree that Obama gets out of the White House and gets out of the Beltway and gets with the people and stirs the people up, connects with the people, including in the congressional districts of his most ardent adversaries, I think the more successful he will be. Now, something that somebody said earlier, maybe it was Mike, is I think that we underestimate the power of story to convert somebody. And I think that what has happened in Newtown is that story is so tellable. It is a shame, I think, that we don't pay attention to the fact that 34 people are killed with gun violence every day, and most of them are in urban areas, and that means poor people and people of color. I think it's a shame that we don't get alarmed by that. And the fact that these Newtown kids, and Blanco talking about the 20 empty desks in his poem, and the fact that these parents are telling their stories, I think it really has changed the consciousness of the country around that issue. We need to be telling the story about people who are getting into the neck as a result of the 2008 economic crisis, and the fact that there hasn't been real criminal accountability about the people in Wall Street who were responsible for that, and on and on and on. Those stories have to be told to the degree, he's such a great storyteller, to the degree that he can go and be with the people and tell us those stories from the people, in the middle of those people, and then continue to define himself. I think that's the key. But heretofore, he's not done that. And I think he's learned. I think in one of the comments he made on 60 Minutes several months ago was, I failed at not getting the narrative out. And that's the story issue. And that's where I criticize him, along with a lot of other things that have been said here today. Thanks very much, and thanks for reading Friedman. Please, Clark.
One of the most important issues, I think, has been the Citizens United issue. And I haven't heard that as strongly from the president. And I'm wondering what we as a parish plan to do in terms of supporting the movement to amend that issue.
Absolutely.
The money is just drowning the democracy.
Very well said. Money is drowning the democracy. And we have gone on record, I have gone on record supporting Reich and Common Ground in calling for that amendment. And I don't think that that has died. It's going to be very interesting to go back to the point about the State of the Union. You know, in last year, was it last year's State of the Union, or year before, he called out Citizens United as being a bad decision, and from his perspective as a constitutional attorney and a teacher of constitutional law. And you remember the camera went on to Judge Alito, maybe? Yeah, and he said, not true. And so I thought that was a great use of the bully pulpit for the president. I don't know if he's going to continue to say that, but I hope that he does say something. It is horrible how democracy is being eroded by this influx of so much money. It's really, really bad. But I want to make a note about that, please.
Last night I read in Time magazine Joe Klein's editorial about the inauguration, and he drew an arc from Kennedy's inauguration to this inauguration of Obama, and starting with the torch has been passed line in Kennedy's inauguration, and made quite a point, I think, that he used a graphic, actually, an open quotation mark, and this is the closed quotation mark, on a whole era of change. And that what's so very important is that it was Obama's second inauguration. He wasn't elected once, he was re-elected, and how important that is. And that we've gone through the whole crisis of civil rights and all the stuff that's happened between Kennedy and now, and that now we're going to start something else. And I thought that was really interesting, that he's starting with Kennedy.
Now, was Klein saying that this is a close of a chapter of change, or that it's the beginning of the beginning of a new chapter, but still about change?
Yeah.
Got it.
But a lot has happened in between that allowed him to stand up there, re-elected as president.
Yeah. The re-election thing is really important. That is just... Okay, where we are. We've got two hands up. Here come the mics. Hey, Ralph.
I consider myself an environmentalist, and I'm very concerned. Excuse me. I'm very concerned about climate change, and I know that Obama threw in those words, but what has happened is that the progressives have been literally traumatized by the conservatives on this issue, and the result has been that they are afraid. They're really afraid to bring up this issue. And you saw what happened in Sandy. We had the hottest year we've ever had. As George was saying, we in the world, we use much more energy than any other country, and we put out much more pollution into this air than any other country. There is no plans that I've heard of from the administration to really aggressively approach this issue, and we've sort of taken a back seat in the Tokyo Protocol and these others. And I just think that we have a real crisis on our hands from an environmental point of view, and that needs to be addressed.
I totally agree with you. Thank you very much. Speaking of climate control and pollution level and all of those kinds of things and being stewards of the earth, I just want to highlight our speaker tomorrow night, John Philip Newell, who really comes at it from a very prayerful and political perspective about salva terra, saving the earth through saving the souls of people and doing it from an interfaith perspective. I promise you, you're coming to be with him tomorrow night from 7 to 9 will be transformative for you about radical political spirituality. Thanks, Ralph. Who has it, please? Yeah.
Speaking of stories, I feel like we are in an amazing moment as a part of this story, and that this speech comes at an amazing time, a convergence of many different things, thinking of the environmental issues, economic issues, peace and justice issues. And as I listened to Obama's speech, I was hearing the story that we have lived into as a young family, and that we have met almost every single one of those points that he is addressing, trying to raise a child, trying to run a business, trying to make a living. And those have all been a part of our story. And many of the studies and the readings that I've been doing lately have to do with how the money system that has been in place for several hundred years, and especially the last 100 years, is in many ways coming to an end. It's not working anymore. And I could almost hear behind Obama's speech the corporations sharpening their knives, getting ready to tear this thing to pieces. And the voices that I respect in this story who are bringing their vision to the conversation, whether it's David Korten or Charles Eisenstein with Sacred Economics, they're advocating for a turning of the age of sorts that will help to remove the power that money has had to contradict the very things that Obama was talking about. And until that begins to happen, until we can learn that the story we've been living in is worn out, like you said, and begin to move as a community of young and old, every color, every race, to come together out of an age of separation to an age of connection, of oneness. I don't think that story is going to change, I guess, is what I'm getting at, until we recognize that the money is fighting the story that we want to be told, and that we need to begin to invest in community, that is the antidote, as opposed to investing in corporate structures.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Y'all, keep your eyes open for that story that he just so elegantly put. Some of the most exciting reading I do is about the economic structure being totally unsustainable. And it is going to fall. It is going to implode. And I think it's really important for us to be savvy about that. We have an economic justice task force that's been, Robin, raise your hand. Robin is leading this, an attorney who works in this area all the time. We have a group of really smart people around her. They're going to give their interim report to the vestry staff conference on March the 1st. They're working with the nonviolence task force that we developed as a result of James Lawson coming to teach us so much this past year. And now they're connecting all the dots to all of these other peace and justice issues, and they're going to keep us informed. I'm unfortunately going to have to, no, we're going to take one more. Yeah, okay, one more question. But David Korten, whom he mentioned, is going to be here Thursday night at 7, I think it's 7:30, in this room, right? Upstairs. Please come and be instructed by him. This gets to the business of competency. All of us in this room have to be competent not only about the content of these issues, but how they interact and are interconnected with one another, and also how we do our political business about changing this life that we live, that grinds people down and grinds down human lives. So please come. And then Charles Eisenstein, I'm glad you're reading him too. It's a fascinating reader. So one last question right here. Oh, I'm sorry. The microphone's here first. Gene, let me go to him, please.
Hi, my name's John. I'm somewhat relatively new here.
Hey, welcome.
And it's interesting because as I sort of contemplated whether I was going to say what I wanted to say, there's a theme that kind of has emerged, and especially with what you just spoke about, because, you know, that's something that when I really get into it, it's so true, but it's so depressing. Like, it really becomes, like, I mean, I literally, like, I just, like, walk around and look around and I'm like, you know, what is it all for? But something else in the speech, in another area that, and it's a story, but another story that came out of the speech for me is so empowering, is when he sort of defined the three legs of the stool in a way that it's never been done before in terms of our civil rights, you know, journey. Seneca Falls, Selma, and Stonewall. Now, I love alliteration, so that was nice. But there's also a power in threes. Like, actually, the number three is important. Like, somehow it has some natural power. But what that did for the first time, as obvious as it may seem, is that to take any one of those movements on their own, it's easy enough to focus on the negative. You know, the civil rights movement was like, you know, how we were, you know, trying to get over some terrible thing that we'd done. But when you take them as a group, it almost becomes the opposite. To me, it's like our point. Like, maybe this is the hero's journey of us all, and by kind of neatly describing it in a way like that in a story, I think that it opens up the possibilities for all of us to really actively think about, well, and make the choice of what's next. And that could be kids far away in other parts of the world that we are now going to commit to, commit to celebrating or whatever it is. And so I thought that was a remarkable part of the speech.
Thank you very, very much. There is an arc. And I think if Desmond Tutu were here and Dr. King were here, they would want to emphasize this. There really is a thing that got started in the Exodus, the release of the Hebrew children through Moses' leadership, that has not stopped and will not stop and cannot be stopped. And I think that we can take great hope in that, and it can be encouragement for us to work and increase our competency and increase our effectiveness. Jean, one last comment.
First of all, Ed, thank you for your eloquence.
Oh.
And I hope others saw the wonderful Martin Smith documentary this week on banking. It's a fantastic expose on Frontline. And I'm sure we could get a tape. I wish we could get Martin Smith here sometime.
We'll try. Martin Smith was in charge of this Frontline thing. And somebody lost their job the next week as a result. In the Justice Department as a result of this. So please, you can go on your computers to Frontline and download it. And Martin's sister, Hannah Cully, is a member of this parish, and we'll certainly try to get him here. Now, thank you very much. We've gone over time, and I just want to say that our being here and talking about these matters really, in my mind, is a commitment to action. What makes All Saints different is that we turn our faith into action. And faith without action is dead. So let's make sure that we understand that God is in the least of these, and that the image of God is in absolutely every person. And we are called to stand as advocates for the preservation and protection of the humanity of every human being. So thank you very much for being here.